Well, yeah, we have seen sort of this U.S. administration carrying on a fairly tough on the Chinese Communist Party approach. Like, Antony Blinken, I guess it was after the meeting. I'm trying to remember the timeline, but he met with NATO officials and specifically said we need to come together to counter the Chinese Communist Party.
Right. And ahead of the meeting, it was meeting with South Korea and Japan, and both of those statements kind of either alluded to or directly mentioned China as a security risk to the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad they're carrying on that important term, factoring India into the region.
Yeah, and I think also what's interesting is that we're seeing that increasingly, and I know we've talked about this many times before, but standing up to the Communist Party is not a left or right issue. For example, we have a left-leaning administration in this country. South Korea is a much more left-leaning administration. Japan is a left-leaning administration now. Many of our allies in NATO are like that and coming together to stand up to the CCP. Whereas I think what happened during the Trump administration is some people were like, oh, well, this is a Republican thing or this is a right-leaning thing, but it's really not. And I think it's good that there's this sort of widespread agreement across the political spectrum that this is a really important issue.
And I think domestically there is a certain pressure on the Biden administration because there is this bipartisan idea that, that there's problems with our relationship with China.
Mm-hmm. And in a way, the Biden administration does have something to prove, considering Biden himself, his past failures in dealing with China, both as a senator and as vice president. The Hunter Biden scandal with his deals with China is also sort of a cloud over the administration, as well as some of the other high-ranking members of the Biden administration who were former Obama administration officials, people like Kirk Campbell, who was responsible for the Scarborough Shoal incident back during the 2012.
Well, I mean, he wasn't responsible for the incident, but he was supposed to be negotiating with the Chinese side.
He was responsible for the diplomatic fallout that hurt our relations with all Southeast Asian nations for the next decade.
Yeah, the Chinese Coast Guard basically seized control of the Scarborough Shoal and looked like the Philippines and China were going to come to a blow over this. And so Kirk Campbell negotiated an agreement where both sides would withdraw. The Philippines withdrew and China did not. And then Kirk Campbell was like, well, we're not going to go to war over a couple rocks.
Not sure he said that because I looked that up again.
Really?
And it seems to be attributed to an unnamed U.S. military official. So it's not clear. Because I had also read previously that Kirk Campbell said that. Now I'm not sure anymore. So.
Okay, so
I always have this level of distrust whenever media have unnamed sources. Because I understand that sources want to protect themselves, but also if a source isn't willing to go on camera, they can just say anything and it might be untrue, and there's no way for anyone else to verify that. So in general, I think it's we should take it with a much bigger grain of salt than most people do.
But the point is, the Biden administration is kind of operating under this cloud of suspicion about what their China policy will be. So it is good to see Antony Blinken coming out and saying these things about China. The State Department just released its 2020 report on human rights in China. And they were very critical of the Chinese Communist Party. They called what's happening to the Uyghurs genocide.
And crimes against humanity.
It also talked about organ harvesting of Uyghurs and Falun Gong practitioners.
Although I noticed they said that it's that several groups and organizations still accuse,
it said there was no direct evidence of organ harvesting, but that was pulled from the 2019 State Department report under the Trump administration.
But I think even a lot of the groups that are saying organ harvesting is definitely happening, they're also saying, well, we don't have direct evidence. We have all sorts of circumstantial evidence and other things. And when put together, they paint this very clear picture. But yeah, I can understand that. But the fact that they even got it in there, I think, is saying something. And yeah, there's
Though it was also in the State Department report from the previous year, also under the Trump administration. So this is something where we see a continuing thread between the administrations on how to deal with China.
Although I have to say, they've only been in office for 2 months, so they've probably been working on this report for longer. Parts of this report could have been just carryover from the Trump administration as well, just because.
So we might have a better idea of next year how they say things.
Yeah, and I think that there are definitely good signs like the sanctions that the U.S. and the EU did against Chinese officials for the the Uyghur genocide.
That was very interesting because, Biden's whole thing was like, China is a threat, but Trump did it wrong. We need to work with our allies. And so there's kind of like, okay, well, let's see what he actually does. Is he able to do that? And so it was great to see that, I don't know what the impetus was. Like, I don't think leaders of Europe would say, Biden asked us to do this and we did it. But at least U.S. allies coming together to do these sanctions on
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that is Europe was under a lot of pressure because they were not, like a lot of other countries had passed Magnitsky Acts. Blech.
Yeah,
Magnitsky Acts. It's always hard to pronounce.
Magnitsky. There's not the other N.
Magnitsky Acts.
Yeah.
So, the EU had kind of been slow on passing this.
Mhm.
The idea that you could sanction individual foreign officials for, crimes that they commit.
Mhm.
So the EU is a little slow. So they were under that pressure. The EU is under pressure because of the whole the investment deal with China.
Oh, the one that happened
Yeah.
earlier this year.
And so this was the EU Parliament who was not totally happy with that deal that was kind of made outside the Parliament, but has to be approved by the Parliament. So now the Parliament was the one that sanctioned these officials. So I think there's like other inter-EU politics and things happening. So.
Yeah. But wasn't this the first sanctions of any kind Europe has put on China since the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre?
Yeah, and I think that's partially because they were able to sanction individual officials.
Instead of the country itself, which would anger China.
Yes, that would. I think this also
Definitely
angered China.
Angered China as well.
I mean, I think also things like the Taiwan Coast Guard deal, when we had Grant
Yeah.
Newsham on, this was one of the things he was talking about, right? Like that the U.S. should be helping Taiwan more in terms of helping them train, helping, like, our military should be working together.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the Coast Guard's not quite seen the same as, like, the Marine Corps, but it's a step,
significant,
yeah.
definitely.
But I think that one thing that the Trump administration was very clear on that I think that the Biden administration does not share is the kind of idea that this is an ideological great power competition. That this is actually about, American values versus the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, they seem to want to kind of shy away from sort of the Cold War rhetoric, for lack of a better word.
And I think it's that also there's this idea that, talking about American values would be imposing our imperialism or our hegemony on the rest of the world, right? Like this is kind of more of a, like, this is kind of how Democrats versus Republicans more see.
Yeah, there's definitely, when you're talking a little more on the left, the idea that you don't want to impose, the values are a little more relative, even though I don't think anyone would say, like, freedom and democracy are like subjective values, and like China's authoritarianism is just as equal or just as good as freedom.
No, I don't think that's what they would say, but I think there is, like, Biden kind of alluded to this in his whole town hall thing that kind of got twisted into him saying that genocide was like a cultural value or something.
Yeah.
But what he was really saying was still that, Xi Jinping understands that, like, different countries have different cultural values. So there is that idea that, China's cultural values are just different. They're just more authoritarian. It's really just, that's not actually China's cultural values. It's the Chinese Communist Party.